Energy Ghana TV. Local in focus, global in perspective. Today, we are privileged to have a conversation with the Chief Executive Officer of the Chamber of Bulk Oil Distributors, Dr. Patrick Ofori. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Before we even go deep into the conversations, I'd like you to tell me a bit about yourself, about your professional experiences, and your current role at CBOD.
Thanks for the opportunity. Well, as you know, I started my profession as a psychologist. I'm a chartered psychologist and a fellow with the British Psychological Society. My career has spanned from corporate academia and then also the downstream and upstream petroleum sector, which has taken me through from TOR, where I started as a manpower planning officer for TOR during the time whereby there were a lot of that exodus to Oman when the RFCC technology hit the Middle East. That TOR at that time had trained a lot of personnel who the Koreans believe could manage any plant all over the world. That caused for that exodus. So I came in then as a manpower planning officer to plan and track our national service personnel who have been involved in the plan, which gave us the base for us to quickly train them so that we can start the plan. So from there, I left a corporate, started teaching part-time at a Methodist University and then also Legon to set up the sports MSI psychology unit there. And I left as a Commonwealth scholar to Sterling to finish my PhD there. I returned to University of Cape Coast as a lecturer, where I also helped set up the sports science department within the medical school there. Whilst doing that, I was still consulting for the British Council, where we did a couple of work for the upstream sector in the impact of Tallow Scholarship Initiative within the Western Enclave and a couple of other activities that took us to Vodafone, doing Vodafone scholarships, STEM scholarship for girl child. And through that, I ended up in GMPC, where I started from the foundation and then later ended up as corporate and institutional reporting, and then later the crude oil marketing desk, whereby we traded with that. In the process, we liaised with PIAC and the Parliament of Ghana to discuss issues basically about GMPC's work program and how we're making good use of Ghana's proceeds from the oil. And in that also we learned the trading, which eventually gave me the opportunity to bid for this job that currently I'm working as CEO. But I would say that it has spanned from HR, academia, research, and then more about compliance and commodity trading.
Wow. Kindly give us insights into the operations of CBOD in the petroleum downstream sector.
I think more or less we are an advocate or a research entity whereby we represent the collective good of the private sector. That is basically the bulk oil distributors, those who import fuel. They are in line in doing their individual businesses. That makes it difficult for them to push their research agenda, and that of also lobbying and public advocacy for them. So as a secretariat, we coordinate the interests of our members and then try to lobby key stakeholders to also appreciate the demands of the private sector within the downstream petroleum sector. But of course, sitting in this seat gives you the opportunity to serve in other roles in government that also help us to prepare and push for research and policy advocacy that seeks to broaden that cuts across the private sector participation in either the energy sector or in the entire economy. economic space.
Okay. What have been the challenges and prospects that have come up, being CBOD in the petroleum downstream sector in Ghana?
We are built for such challenges, and I think I need to commend members for their ability to hold the tie for Ghana. You look at in dire situations where other oil-producing countries and then even the advanced world were experiencing fuel shortages and other things, due to the output or the performance of our members, well, the country was still moving on as if nothing has happened. And this was because most of our members have conducted themselves well to still attract the needed credit and capital within the space to ensure that we never experience shortages. But there are certain challenges that sometimes go beyond them. Basically, issues about the foreign exchange volatility of the performance of the cedi, which is basically beyond their control. And then also the depreciation of the currency, which at a point in time hit them so hard that makes it difficult for them to do that. Trading any form of commodity has got its own risks associated with this, and some of these risks you really will require a bit more solid background and then a quite big investment to be able to come out when you hit a downward trend. But overall, I think the key big players, irrespective of the risks associated, have still managed to hold forth since their inception, and that is something that we need to commend them for. And the other thing that couples with policy changes, which sometimes does not necessarily favor private sector, and normally the government will want to give excuses that they want the good for the public good. But basically, policy inconsistency has not really helped with the kind of investment that members pay to set up these institutions. So on the whole, I think these have been the major challenges, but although it's a challenge, but within that we still find a way to coexist.
Moving away from the whole conversation on your operations, coming to the energy transition, which is more of a rampant conversation, which is trending across the globe. What would you say your thoughts are on the energy transition framework of Ghana to achieve zero carbon emissions by 2070? And also, how does CBOD fit into that narrative?
The conversation about energy transition, while it's a must-have and a good-to-have conversation that will prepare us, but as a country, we need to contextualize that. Okay. We many a times want to follow the West, and I always say that in your development, once you skip a stage in your development, it will definitely come back to haunt you. When gas was cut from Russia, the Germans and the Western world started powering their coal plants. Between coal and hydrocarbons, which of them really pollute the environment? We also need to have that conversation, taking into consideration not necessarily having stranded assets, which basically there was pushing an agenda which will obviously curtail the investment into hydrocarbons. But for every context that you discuss in a particular phenomenon, you need to relate it to what it is that you need. Do you still exploit your hydrocarbons as a means to finance your transition, which is a critical question that I think that our energy transition plan seeks to address. And then when you're talking about energy transition, we're looking at it from just maybe the policy directive or policy initiatives. But there is a key component which also we need to start looking at. Is investing in the right kind of research and the skilled personnel to be able to really support the transition agenda. Are you talking or having the conversation about energy transition and thinking that you're still going to borrow from the West or borrow from the West to hire their experts to come and push your to finance your transition agenda? The key aspect that we've not been able to learn from mining and other things is developing the needed human capital to be able to drive our own narrative and to be able to shift the focus to ensure that. And this is where I think if we're talking about energy transition, the first and the most important aspect is financing research. How many of our institutions, be it the state or the private sector, all of us involved, has given maybe any of the sciences department, the scientific or the research centers in Ghana about, let's say, $50 million to research into energy transition. For you to have any renowned or requisite lab to start talking about some of these conversations, you need over $1 billion to set up those labs. So we cannot necessarily be talking about energy transition and then positioning ourselves, whereby the key component that we seek to drive and contextualize our needs, which is research, training of the human capacity, we've not made the required investment.
We've not met that standard.
We've not met that standard. So it's more like we are talking about the transition, and it's more like a top-down approach, because those who have invested in that and can talk about carbon emissions and are talking about all these, they've made those investments. They are speaking based on the research that their leading academicians and academic institutions have churned out to be able to have such discussions and conversations. So I think whilst we push for the transition agenda, I think the key thing is we need to first invest in the research, the technical capacity to be able to do that. And why do I say this? I've got a couple of friends who invested in solar panels. And then after the installation of the solar panel, we've forgotten that we needed to also train technicians who will be maintaining that and operating it. So most solar panels that we invested in about 10 or so years ago, now you don't have the technical personnel to even do the retrofitting or make the required changes when the system shut down. So we need to look at it from a multifaceted approach and not necessarily looking at it as from the emission point of view. But are we really prepared as a nation to have such a conversation and then to sign up to all these treaties? And I think for us to start such a conversation and to push that agenda, the first and the foremost thing that we need to look at, how do we commission the research? And is there a way that Ghana can even escape this transition? Because before you realize that escape the transition and then escape the transition, what I'm trying to say is not necessarily following the current trajectory, because those who are researching and now telling you about the renewables and other things have gone beyond that.
Yes.
That they are testing different things in their laboratories. So if we are to set up that pace, we can skip this and then also go to maybe the other forms of transition that may come. Like we've transitioned from coal to crude oil, and now we are talking about from crude or hydrocarbons to renewables. Certainly at the renewable side of the transition, we are not going to end there, or the greener version of the transition, we are not going to end there. New technologies are going to come. How are we addressing this gap? The skills gap that needs to be done, the research and the technology gap that would need to be met, so that we will be able to position ourselves to.
Still on that tangent, what is CBOD's role? What role is CBOD playing actively to encourage the energy transition?
I think the discussion that we are having now is one role that we can push through our advocacy means, and then also in developing Ghana's energy transitional policy, the chamber as a key player within the sector also was part in putting that document together. Our role is to also create the awareness and sensitization among our members to also start directing or rediversifying some of their investment into energy, renewable energy and other energy, new forms of energy that will require that investment. So we may have a plan with some of our members who have got the necessary capital, access to the necessary capital to be able to start investing in that infrastructure. Because you cannot be talking about whatever form of renewable, when you don't have the storage facilities, the transmission lines that will be using in transmitting all those forms of energy forms. And that will require different set of investment, different from what it is that we currently have with the hydrocarbon setup. But it's always good not to operate as a tabula rasa, but to also build on the known to the unknown. And basically that is where I think the chamber and our members are well positioned to be able to build on the needed skills and then the needed capital and the know-how to be able to invest in these forms of renewable energy sources.
Nominations for the 7th edition of the prestigious Ghana Energy Awards is officially open. Visit www.ghanaanergyawards.com for more information on the award categories and to file nominations.
Moving to ethanol fuel production in Ghana, what exactly is this ethanol fuel and what are the types of ethanol fuel?
Basically, ethanol fuels are what normally referred as bioethanol, and these are alternative fuels from renewable sources that are plant-based, either from starchy crops like cassava, corn, and then also from sugarcane or sugar beet, which normally forms the basis of ethanol, whereby it's fermented in the form of alcohol-based energy that normally we use to mix or supplement to gasoline to ensure combativeness of engines and also fuel efficiency. But technically, we also have two main forms of ethanol. The first generational ethanol, those are the ones coming from the plant-based starchy foods, and then alcohol that will be induced from that. So that more or less form the first generation. Whereas the second generation is that which is we derive from the biogas, the plant residuals that we normally use them and convert them into an energy use. But it's basically renewable in nature.
Why is ethanol fuel a better fuel option, as opposed to other fuel sources?
I won't necessarily use the word better. As we having the conversation, like our previous conversation that borders on energy transition, and then also the quest to have alternative forms of energy is always a welcome ideal to have such source. It may be new, it not necessarily new, but it may be new in our part of the world, so it definitely also presents its own opportunities. But you can look at its impact from the environmental benefits, and it's also being renewable in nature. Clearly, the sulfur dioxide components within ethanol-based energy is not compared to the fossil fuel. So once you have fuels that are coming from such sources, it means we all get a chance of breathing a less polluted air. So air concentration becomes better when normally machines or the cars that are going to be powered by ethanol forms of energy. There is also the opportunity out there for new investment, and you can use that as a catalyst to promote rural economies and then the agricultural sector, whereby rural development could be centered around such production plants, and like the government flagship program of One District, One Factory. All this can be tailored in to have a bigger scope of production that also ensure that the cassava that we produce does not necessarily end up in our homes to pound fufu, but also create an alternative forms and have other indirect benefits in terms of employment generation and other aspects. So I think it's a conversation worth to have, and then also it's an energy source worth exploring.
Finding out that there's more we can do with cassava than just eat it. I think
and sugarcane.
It's a laudable one, and sugarcane as well.
So that it will not necessarally end up as
now looking at the Ghanaian landscape, kindly give us an overview of ethanol fuel production in Ghana. What is the current situation? What are the potentials of ethanol fuel production in Ghana? And how does it compare to the demand for transportation fuel?
So I will start from the last bit. The demand for it obviously has not developed, and we don't have a more or less a ready market for it. Basically, because we don't have the infrastructure to support it. Because it also has got its own set of infrastructural requirements that you need to invest in before you can extract those values. So that is why I see that we should see it more as an opportunity for emerging markets that we can also invest in and then tap into the resource availability there. As to the profile and the potential for Ghana, basically all the lands available in Ghana that are common in producing that, from a dry enclave and then even among the Accra Plains, all these lands are arable land that can produce maize. You go to the bit of the forest belt areas, the forest belt area, we can also generate the cassava from it, and then look at it also from even the central region along the coastal area, like Komenda, Edina, Guafo areas too. You can also invest in huge sugarcane plantation to also extract ethanol-based energy from these enclaves. So you can look at it from this angle. And then even in the northern and the savannah belt, with a bit of irrigation, you can also grow a lot of maize to extract the corn into that. Edra going to Techiman areas can also become another hub where we can harness that. So in terms of the arable land and the agricultural potential of Ghana, which has never been in question, clearly gives a profile as a major destination for us to be able to invest in ethanol production. So Ghana, I would say, has what it takes to really grab the opportunities that comes with ethanol as our alternative energy source.
This shows us that the energy sector is not far away from other sectors in Ghana, because this shows the connection between agriculture and the energy sector as well.
And even the Ministry of Trade.
Yes, definitely.
I talk about the 1D1F concept and how you can dovetail all that in there, whereby these key sectors can also naturally be developed. And even was tend to a sector like education, whereby as if we are to plan consciously, whereby all the agric extension officers that are either Legon or KNUST and then Cape Coast University are producing, they get a ready jobs.
Coming to the impact, what is the actual impact of ethanol fuel production in terms of the social, the economical, and the environmental impact on the producers, that is the farmers who produce the cassava, and even we the consumers, those of us who like to eat the fufu, the banku, the gari? What's going to be the impact?
So I want to look at it from the social side. We could say and develop slogans in the form of ethanol as a vehicle for rural development, ethanol production, so that we make that conscious effort to tie rural agricultural development into ethanol production, whereby all these districts are also used to tie in that. So there is ready market, there is job creation for unemployed youth to be able to go in there to do that. Then also comes in ethanol in the commercial scale production from the raw material production. That is where you spark agro small scale industry promotion and development that can also help to do that. And like it happened during those days, the banana plantations in Liberia, whereby you can have those big entities who invest in huge hectares of ethanol production and then scale and provide some form of extension support and agri support, and then outlet to even buy from the local farmers or the small subsistence farmers who will be producing their 2 or 3 acres of cassava or sugarcane, so that all can have some element of a commodity trading outlet for them, so that the issue of producing maize and then going rotten or not having ready market for
your
all
product.
these foodstuffs can be a thing of the past. So that is on the social economic aspect. Then also the environmental impact of ethanol. We all know that it's not necessarily combustible and it's not so much of a pollutant as the fossil fuels are. So that also help you to do that, and then also change your narrative towards energy transition, and then also scale up, giving yourself a target that maybe for the next 10 or so years, we want Ghana's energy mix to be, let's say, 10% of ethanol to be added to our gasoline mix, so that we can also ensure that. There is also an opportunity for new technological development into retrofitting other cars that will be picking alternative fuels like ethanol. That can also be looked into. What even the car assembling plants now, that Ghana in the next 10 or so years will be in a position to produce this quantum of ethanol, and that as you look into your strategic plans and development for the car manufacturing sector or the assembling plant, you should start assembling cars with engines that should be able to be off-taking this fuel that we are going to produce, or that we are going to scale up to this percentage in the country. So that has its own benefit, and the rest about the economic impact, you can't underestimate it. With this, it gives you some form of energy security and self-reliance, that you don't necessarily need to buy huge quantities of dollars or foreign exchange to be able to import other hydrocarbons. That when the Russian-Ukraine war came up, we were all thinking about energy security and fuel security. But if you know your overall energy mix, 30% of it is going to be produced or generated locally without the needed
foreign interference.
Foreign interference, and then not only that, foreign exchange. That automatically also gives you some element of currency stability without necessarily going out there chasing the few dollars to be importing petroleum products. That automatically reduces the demand or the burden on the city with regards to that. There are also other opportunities whereby you become the hub for exporting ethanol fuel to the neighboring countries.
Okay.
That also can serve as a means of increasing your foreign exchange reserves and other opportunities that comes with it. So I think it's a conversation that we can always explore and then research into and harness the needed benefit that comes from such forms of energy.
Ethanol fuel has a lot of advantages, clearly, from what you said. However, there are existing concerns about the adverse effects or adverse impacts that come out of its production. In line with that, conversation on the adverse effects and the impacts, how can such issues be addressed, and especially for the transport sector and also for food security, especially knowing the source of ethanol fuel? How do we address such issues? Is it a cause for alarm?
I won't say that. I think this is where, in advocating for ethanol production, we are not looking at a situation whereby we're making a blanket advocacy. What we want to do is that we need to develop the policy framework for it first. So that for, let's say, every 10,000 hectares of land that will be allocated for, let's say, cassava production, that will be going into ethanol, there should be additional, let's say, 30% that will be used as a way of combating the trade that food security will do that. You know that for all registered or licensed outgrowers for this commodity, 30% of the market should be reserved for domestic food consumption. That in itself serves as a leverage for you to even enhance your agricultural production, because they know that at least there is ready market for that, and then what even they cannot consume as food will end up in the industry for them to use to produce the ethanol. So I see those challenges as a blessing with the right policy interventions that you can turn that around to rather change the negative into become a positive. Whereas with the issue about the transportation system that because we've not necessarily invested in the technology aspect of it, like we haven't with the battery lives of electric cars. Now with the investment in science, the duration and the battery lives are increasing, and that is what we want, and also think that once we invest with the required technology and the required research investment, the inadequacies of ethanol fuel can be enhanced upon and improved, and that also present an opportunity to promote locally indigenous-based research that can be contextualized to ensure that inefficiencies can be turned around. So with these two approaches, I think the major concerns of ethanol or the threat of ethanol as an energy source can easily be addressed with the right kind of policy framework.
Speaking on these opportunities that we are looking to get for Ghana, how do we scale up production of ethanol fuel from your perspective in terms of infrastructure, policy, technology, and market development as well?
I think for us to scale up, that is where we expect government or the authorities to really present a proposal that the private sector will be eager to join. Okay. Is there a possibility for tax incentive for people who are willing to invest more than $10 million or $100 million into setting it up from maybe the outgrowing stage to the processing stage and then to the extraction and then the storage facility for ethanol. So if we are to have this overall and the benefit there, you definitely attract there. Then also some element of protectionism needs to be given to those who are going to make those investments so that they can also recoup in their investment. You don't sign up to such capital intensive projects. You invest your 100 million, and then when there is a change in government or there is a government changing policy direction that will say, no, we need to shelve this plan. And by that time, you've let people throw their cash away or their investment away. And it's something that we need to take into consideration, whereby policies should be aligned with the developmental growth agenda that seeks to also protect those individuals or even government entities that are going to start the investment into such sectors. Once we are able to do this and they require support and creating the conducive environment for startups, I think we can actually change the narrative.
We can actually change the narrative. Ethanol fuel is a renewable source that we are looking to explore in Ghana, coming from the CBOD CEO. And we're going to delve deeper into the conversation when we come back.
Nominations for the 7th edition of the prestigious Ghana Energy Awards is officially open. Visit www.ghanaanergyawards.com for more information on the award categories and to file nominations.
You're watching Energy Ghana TV, and this is the exclusive interview with Dr. Patrick Ofori, the CEO of the Chamber of Bulk Oil Distributors Ghana. We are still talking about ethanol fuel production, and we're delving into the international sector, talking about Ghana's collaboration and prospects in the international space. Some weeks ago, you had a workshop, the U.S. Grains Council had a workshop with CBOD, and there were key stakeholders from the sector participating in this workshop. Building on that, let's talk about your partnership with the U.S. Grains Council. How do you foresee ethanol fuel production in terms of collaboration with, international bodies and various organizations, regional or international? And how would this change the narrative of ethanol fuel production and utilization in Ghana?
What we sought to do is that you need to first do an internal assessment and be honest with yourself. Do you have the capacity to do what it is that you intend to do? we basically, after such analysis, we realized that not much has been done in Ghana, with the exception of Nigeria, that through the support of the U.S. Grain Council, they've done a couple of feasibility studies there. So how then can we tap into an existing entity that have got the know-how and the experts to really collaborate with to do that? And then, as a strategy, we decided that, well, CBOD will represent a group. And in our advocacy space, we also have key stakeholders that we leverage and deal with. Can we get U.S. Grain Council to do that workshop with them? And then, based on the workshop, we can then see if really the interest is there for the private sector, who are necessarily the engine of growth to really invest and then also push that agenda. We got that sensitization and the awareness created, and then the follow-up, we've seen that a couple of them are interested in doing that. So we intend building upon the relationship that was somehow in an informal state to rather formalize it and then develop a roadmap with the key thematic areas that we may seek to harness and then push the ethanol production and then development within the Ghana energy space.
While ethanol fuel production in Ghana is still nascent, it's still novel, what are the best practice examples that you can give to Ghana to draw on from countries that have a long historical record in terms of ethanol production?
Whereas in the US, it involved a lot of advocacy that needed to be taking place before ethanol was accepted to be there, because normally what comes to mind is plant-based food security. And that is why from all that we are seeking to do, we say that, well, we can also learn from the gaps in policy or the operational challenges that other countries have that are already into it have suffered, and then draw on that to develop policies that will seek to regulate the space first, and that will also seek to give conditions and some form of incentive to those who also want to invest in that. But the most important thing that we want to do is to contextualize the ethanol market in Ghana. What are our strengths as a country? What it is that we can do differently, and what it is that we can also learn from those who have developed. So we're seeking that as a way of promoting that. We don't want to promote it in a way that is that is more like an alienated program that we are seeking to push, but rather we want to develop a multi-phase approach whereby all the key stakeholders, the regulatory bodies, we carry all of them along to ensure that we can actually have a safer space for people's investment, a safer space for the country's energy needs, and then also a safer phase for our food security. And that is why I was proposing that for every quantity or hectare that will be allocated for ethanol commercial production, at least 50 or 40%, or depending on what we want to benchmark based on the production levels of food commodities that will be used for, we need to have that broader perspective to ensure that whilst we seek to promote the industrialization of some of these crops to be used as an alternative fuel, we don't shortchange these crops that would have ended up in our kitchens as a food crop.
Finally, how do you foresee the future of ethanol fuel production and utilization in Ghana? And what steps do you believe are necessary on the part of all stakeholders to achieve this future for Ghana?
I think we need to dare to psychovate. We need to dare to challenge the status quo. Once we've not done it before, that does not necessarily mean that we can't have a success story out of this. After all, don't try this often the impossible. So we'll give our best shot, and then we recognize the challenges and the difficulties as a source of motivation for us to be able to navigate the path. And as we look forward to doing this, what we think we also require is building the necessary capacity to be able to appreciate ethanol as an energy form, and then also push for the enabling environment to attract the required investment in the infrastructure, the research that will be needed to really promote it, and have a conscious effort to pass it on from generation to generation, whereby developing the key relevant skills associated with trading ethanol as a commodity or as an energy source, and then also the technical know-how that when we are to even invest in those infrastructure, who become the skill set and the technicians who will be able to drive that. And how best do we ensure we are able to capture this to local communities that will be going there, be more than willing to also have that buy-in. So I think it's a collective effort, and we'll seek to partner your entity and relevant agencies to ensure that we are able to rewrite the narrative when it comes to alternative energy source, whereby we can pivot it around ethanol.
Indeed, the country is still taking steps towards the energy transition, and the CBOD CEO has made us aware of ethanol fuel. Once again, thank you very much, Dr. Patrick Ofori, for making time for us. Research continues, it goes on and on. We are still learning, and I must say we look forward to coming to have more and more conversations with you on ethanol fuel production in Ghana.
Thank you. You're more than welcome, and thanks to you and your team.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
This has been Energy Ghana TV. This has been the exclusive interview with Dr. Patrick Ofori. Do stay with us.
This exclusive interview is proudly brought to you by Airport View Hotel.